This morning, I went through an automatic car wash. You know the feeling. Water blasting against the glass, the high-pressure nozzles screaming, and those giant colorful brushes slamming into the side of the car, making everything vibrate. It's pitch black all around, and you feel completely helpless, trapped in a metal box with no way to open the door and step out. And my mind started wandering. What if you weren't sitting in this metal box sliding down a car wash track, but in a sealed room deep inside the stern of the Titanic, plunging straight down to the ocean floor 2.5 miles below? You're sitting there completely dry, but your chest is tight and your ears are popping because the air is being violently compressed. While right outside that wall, millions of tons of seawater are roaring, waiting to get in. When you're in a car wash, you know for a fact that in exactly 3 minutes, the green light will turn on and you'll drive out into the sunlight. But down in the dark abyss of the North Atlantic, that green light never turns on. Hollywood movies have conditioned us to assume there's no way anyone could be trapped alive inside a sinking ship. They all definitely choked on water and drowned the exact second the ship slipped under the surface, right? Well, the truth is a lot more brutal than that. There were people who were still alive, still breathing in dry rooms as the stern plummeted into the abyss. But the way the ocean took their lives after that is the truly terrifying part. First, we need to dive into exactly what happened to the Titanic in its final moments. At that point, the bow was basically just a massive dead weight wanting to freefall to the bottom of the ocean. But the stern was still full of air and positively buoyant, fighting against the downward pull of the bow. That's why, as the bow sank deeper, the stern rose higher and higher. As the stern rose higher and the bow sank deeper, it put a massive amount of stress on parts of the Titanic's hull that the designers never intended to take that kind of pressure. And then, a short time later, the unthinkable happened. A massive bang echoed from somewhere deep inside the Titanic, and then she broke in half. The stern dropped back down level with the water, while the bow, now completely detached, well, had nothing holding it back anymore. Like I said, it simply free fell to the ocean floor. Meanwhile, the stern, which was still positively buoyant before the break, started a completely new sinking scenario of its own. The gaping wound at the front of the severed stern was gulping down seawater. But the very back tip of the stern was still completely dry and bulging, with a belly full of air. The reason is that the watertight steel bulkheads located further back thankfully weren't torn apart by the break. They held strong and did exactly what their engineers designed them to do: stop the raging waterfall dead in its tracks. This stubborn resistance temporarily sealed the tip of the stern, turning it into a giant hollow buoy, rising higher and higher. Eventually, the stern rose so high that survivors later testified it looked like a giant finger pointing straight up at the sky. But ultimately, as more and more water flooded into the stern, the air and positive buoyancy lost the battle, and the stern slowly but surely began to slip beneath the waves. By exactly 2:20 a.m., that entire wreckage was officially swallowed by the black hole of the North Atlantic. And now it's time to answer the question from the beginning of the video. As you can see, the Titanic's bow, which had 2.5 hours to slowly flood and sink, had plenty of time for most of the air inside to slowly escape as the water rushed in. So, yeah, there is absolutely no way anyone could have been trapped alive inside the bow after it sank. However, the same cannot be said for the stern. It sank incredibly fast after the ship broke in half, just a matter of minutes. The second the ship's stern disappeared from sight, a physical phenomenon known as an air pocket started trapping anyone still stuck inside. If you flip a glass upside down and push it into a bowl of water, the air inside gets compressed into a bubble that pushes back against the water. On the scale of the Titanic, tight spaces like crew quarters or storage rooms turn into giant upside-down glasses. The pressure compressed, the water stopped rising, and you suddenly found yourself in a dry room, suspended in the middle of the ocean. It sounds straight out of a sci-fi movie, but it's pure physics. In 2013, a cook named Harrison Okene was sitting on the toilet of a small tugboat off the coast of Nigeria when suddenly, the boat was ambushed by a rogue wave. The ship sank almost instantly. Harrison was thrown off the toilet, hitting his head on the ceiling, which had now flipped upside down to become the floor. Dazed and bleeding, he faced another shock when he realized his boat had slammed into the ocean floor at a depth of about 100 feet. The power cut out. It was pitch black all around, accompanied by the deafening roar of rushing water. Harrison managed to find his way out of the bathroom, and he started looking for a way to escape his sunken ship. He quickly ran into a few of his fellow crewmates who were doing the exact same thing. However, as more and more water flooded into the space where they were all standing, he was separated from his crewmates by the currents inside the wreck. One by one, their screams faded into silence, and at the time, Harrison thought they had managed to find a way out. But the reality of what was happening was that they were drowning one by one as the water level continued to rise in whatever space they were in. Now, the rapidly rising water was pushing Harrison further back and deeper into the ship, and then he tried to climb as high as he could to get as far away from the water as possible. However, because the ship was upside down, climbing higher inside the wreck meant he quickly hit the bottom of the ship, which was now the ceiling, the absolute furthest forward and highest point he could reach. As the water kept rising and finally entered the space he was standing in, it started compressing his air pocket harder and harder until eventually, the air pressure of the pocket he was in matched the pressure of the surrounding seawater, and the water stopped rising. He was trapped in the only survivable space inside the ship, a tiny air pocket located as far forward as possible, and there was truly nothing he could do but wait for something to happen. Now, just because the water stopped rising doesn't mean Harrison was out of the woods. Far from it. The CO2 from his own exhales was slowly turning that place into a gas chamber. With every breath, he was pumping more and more carbon dioxide into the air around him. But here is the craziest piece of science you probably didn't know. Seawater can actually absorb CO2. The water sitting at his waist was accidentally acting exactly like an air purifier, silently swallowing the toxins and buying him precious extra hours. Even so, this natural filter couldn't run forever. The CO2 concentration would eventually creep up to lethal levels. To make it out of there alive, Harrison needed the most insane miracle. And believe it or not, a miracle did come for him. After about 60 hours trapped in this wreck, alone and in the dark, a dive team found the sunken ship and started going down to recover bodies. While one diver was exploring the wreck, he swam into the air pocket where Harrison was, and Harrison just reached out and grabbed the diver's arm. And if I were that diver, I probably would have had a heart attack. Anyway, the diver quickly helped Harrison. He was pulled out and survived. During those 60 hours, suffering the severe effects of dehydration, Harrison only had a can of Coke. Yeah, that's how he fought off dehydration while in that air pocket. The stern definitely dragged a massive amount of trapped air down with it during its final plunge. So somebody absolutely could have survived inside one of those air pockets as the stern went down. But unlike Harrison's tugboat, which was only stuck at a depth of 100 feet, the Titanic's depth is about 12,500 feet. That is a massive difference in depth. And at those depths, air pockets simply would implode very quickly. But not the kind of implosion like that billionaire sub from a few years ago. To get a true implosion like that, you need a perfectly sealed chamber. And the Titanic's stern was definitely not that. The stern plummeted to the ocean floor at an insane speed. A massive volume of water rushed in and destroyed the air pockets with unimaginable, brutal force. The water charged in and slammed right into you. The crushing force was so extreme that you would basically be vaporized into atoms the exact moment it happened. It's definitely an awful way to go, but at least it didn't give you time to feel the pain. So, some Titanic survivors said they heard several loud explosions coming from the stern after it slipped under the water, and we used to think that was proof of an implosion. But honestly, that was probably just the sound of countless air pockets being violently crushed. Next time you're sitting in a car wash, remember them. Your claustrophobia will end when the green light turns on, and you drive out into the sun. But 12,500 feet down in the dark abyss of the North Atlantic, that green light never turns on. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.